This project is called Bordering on Britishness, and it's basically an oral history of how Gibraltar has changed over the 20th century. It's a project financed by the British government in the form of the Economic and Social Research Council, and we also count on the support of the Gibraltar government and the Garrison Library. And the basis of this research is a series of oral history interviews, up to 400, mostly in Gibraltar, but some across the border in Spain as well, to get both perspectives on this issue. And what we find, if you look at the beginning, the first decades of the 20th century, there's really not much difference between Gibraltarians and Spanish people. There's lots of communication between both sides. There are lots of very, very important kinship relations across the border. Many Gibraltarians are marrying Spaniards. So there's a level of daily languages is very much in Spanish. So there's quite a lot of commonality across the border. What happens is when Franco comes to power, there is an abrupt change in border relations. It becomes increasingly difficult to cross the border. And there's a certain sense that there's a mistrust of the Spanish government, which didn't quite exist before. Now, of course, the evacuation of the civilian population during the Second World War also plays a role. But I think that's been much exaggerated, because most people returned to Gibraltar after spending 4 or 5 years in the UK, and they continue to speak Spanish, they continue to go to Spain, and they continue to marry Spanish women, and that was typically the pattern. So there was much continuity from before and after the war. What changed was increasing threats from Spain. And when the border closes at the end of the 1960s, that's when you get the real rupture. Not only physically, but telephone lines were cut, and all kinds of communication were stopped. And of course, you didn't get the daily flow of Spanish workers crossing the border. Added to that is the fact that more and more Gibraltarians were studying in the UK. So you get a process where people become much more comfortable with English and English culture. Now, you might think that with the opening of the border in 1982, things would simply go back to the previous normality. But it didn't quite happen that way, because in the succeeding decades, there have been a series of threats on the part of the Spanish government, making it very, very difficult to cross the border. And this has been experienced at a very, very physical level, intense frustration and anxiety as people cross the border. So even to this day, there is considerable mistrust and rejection of much that is Spanish. And people will stress that this is not a personal issue. They might have many, many Spanish friends, but very uncomfortable with the idea of the much larger neighbour across the border. But that is just one narrative. There are as many narratives as there are people we've interviewed. So the basic project here is to give voice to that multiplicity of views, of experiences, to show the complexity of what Gibraltar is like today.